Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalai. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. So I've been playing with Cosmic Desktop, and I have to tell you, I am absolutely blown away. So my interest, or I kind of got started like this. I was working with a church who was trying to repurpose some older laptops. And I started with actually elementary OS because I was trying to kind of replicate the Mac environment. And what was kind of funny was it was working and everything was working fine. The one problem that I was running into was we couldn't mirror the HDMI display. That is to say, we could extend it onto a TV, but I wasn't able to get it to mirror for whatever reason. And so they came to me and they're like, hey, we have this problem because we're trying to use this laptop up in this preschool room, and we're trying to mirror the HDMI out of the laptop, but it's real frustrating for our staff because as they're trying to monkey with the computer, they're having to drag the window from the laptop over to the quote-unquote external display, which is extending the display onto the large television. And so is there any way that you could fix that? And so I looked at it a little bit and I couldn't find an easy answer, couldn't find an easy solution. So I figured, well, I'll give Cosmic a try. And so I wiped the laptop, which was previously running elementary OS, and put Cosmic on it. It was funny. Here's how the call came in. They go, hey, we're having a new problem. And the new problem is, well, what it ended up being was that it wasn't sending HDMI audio over, which I was able to resolve a different way. But the way that they described it to me was, it's like the Mac isn't a Mac anymore. And of course, that's because they're on Cosmic Desktop environment, and so it didn't look like Mac. What was interesting to me is twofold. One is we've gone, 6-9 months, something like that, running on elementary OS, and no real distinction from Mac OS. It functioned the way they thought it should function and worked the way that they thought it should work. And so the first thing that clued them in that something was different was when it switched over to Cosmic. But the second thing, all of the things that a typical user goes to look at with Cosmic is instantly there. So by that, I mean, if you go up to the upper right-hand corner, they've got like a little drop-down menu, and you can click on it and say, mirror display, extend display, those sorts of things, turn on airplane mode. All of the things that the user would want to do is available up there. Then I started introducing my wife to it to say, hey, I know you're not really a big tiling desktop person, but is that something you would consider? And so actually on the flight home from Self, no less, she's sitting on my laptop and kind of playing around with Cosmic. And so I used Cosmic to do the broadcast from Self. And so now I've been running it on my laptop for a while just to kind of get an idea. I think it might be one of the best products System 76 has ever put out. And that says something because they make laptops born to run Linux. But they're taking it to a different level, in part because they're in tune with what their customer base wants. And so as they get feedback from those customers and they say, hey, we are looking for X, we're looking for Y, what they're finding is they're running against a brick wall when it's coming to doing things with GNOME. And so they're revamping the desktop from the ground up. But I like the approach that they're taking. Typically, you've had to jump into one of two swimming pools. You either jump into the kiddie pool that is set up like a traditional desktop environment. That is, you have buttons to click on and you drag windows around and those sorts of things. Or you jump into the adult pool, which is tiling window managers. And I say that from the standpoint of, if you're really just trying to get work done and your job is to sit behind a computer all day long, every day, it doesn't take long after you've gotten into the habit of using a tiling window manager to stay there because it just makes you more efficient. Cosmic splits the difference there because it allows you to be like a normal person and use a normal light computer. But then when you get into work mode and you're trying to get things done, you flip a button, click a switch at the very top, that same thing I was telling you about for extending the display, and all of a sudden you're able to tile windows. Then you want to turn it back off, you click on the thing and they go back to regular window managers or regular desktop environment. The other thing is they've emulated a lot of the key shortcuts that come from i3. And so if you're using i3 or if you've used Sway, you're going to feel right at home with Cosmic. Now, as I was kind of doing that and as I was kind of digging through it, and I thought, man, they're really onto something. Like, I legitimately think this is one of the best things System 76 has ever done. And it doesn't surprise me if you're trying to curtail the ultimate experience for your end user that you would eventually design a desktop environment and or a distro. And so it doesn't really surprise me that System 76 is taking this stance. But then I started to come across posts on the internet of other people going, holy cow, have you checked out Cosmic? It's amazing. And so from Reddit, quote, I just compiled Cosmic DE and tried to put it on my install. Oh my gosh, it's actually amazing. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I love the design and everything. System 76, keep up the hard work. I'm definitely going to be contributing to the project. And so they're going to release it out this fall. It's going to be complete. I expect it to be, no word of a lie, no exaggeration, the best desktop experience out there for Linux. And I say that because I'm not sure what other company is putting this sort of work into a full comprehensive desktop experience. So I'm going to use and love KDE forever from the standpoint that it is incredibly customizable. I think they make very good decisions out of the box. It's just a very nice, polished experience, always has been, will continue to be. I have my own struggles with GNOME and the way that they've chosen to implement everything through a single thread, and that's bitten me enough times that it gives me hesitation. And then all the rest of them are good if you want that specific thing. So if you're looking for the absolute minimal style desktop environment, then LXDE or XFC works well. But they all have their drawbacks, particularly if you're trying to compete with other desktop operating systems. I think System 76 Cosmic is going to be a game changer for people that want to run Linux desktops, Linux on the desktop. And so just a huge shout out, a thank you to System 76 for the incredible amount of work that they're doing, because none of that stuff comes free. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes money, and they're putting it in mostly because they're trying to support and provide a good experience to their customers. But what's happening is people around the internet, I mean, this person on Reddit compiling Cosmic DE likely is doing so on his own machine. And so they're bettering the entire Linux ecosystem by doing so. I want to start out with that. We'll get into some feedback. Jay is better than Jay wrote to me and said, hey Noah, I appreciate the deep dive into replacing 3CX. I'm trying to place it myself in a single site medium-sized org. I don't love 3CX, but opening asterisks up to the internet makes me nervous. I'll listen to your episode again and continue mulling this over. So again, if you missed the conversation, go back and listen to the episode where we talked about 3CX and some of the changes that they're making with V20 that I think are just wholly unacceptable to anybody that wants to use a free and open source phone system. It's one thing to say that the software is proprietary. It's another thing to stamp out all open source clients, which is effectively what 3CX version 20 does, unless of course you're willing to run a VM running their special software on your computer. It just isn't practical. And so I'm looking to transition away from it. I also have some concerns, but I'd be interested to hear from you. If you run a phone system, well, let's say 20 extensions or more, I'd be interested to hear if you've opened asterisks up to the internet and how that's worked for you. I've heard from a number of people. I've gotten advice, everything from the newest version of asterisks, they've designed it to run on the internet, and so it's fine. I've heard from people that say you're crazy if you open any box, let alone asterisks, up to the wide open internet, and so place it behind a firewall. I've heard people take a middle approach. They open it up to the internet, but then have control mechanisms in place that will automatically blacklist IPs that continually try to authenticate and fail. So I'm curious on where the wider audience is at. What do you think? What works in your business? What works in your work environment? What have you seen? Is it, hey, we've got it open. We have 100 users connecting from the internet and have been doing so for 5 years and have no issues? Or, hey, we tried that and it was an utter disaster. The last time I tried it, it was an absolute unmitigated disaster. And so I'm hesitant to do it again. However, I think that I would go in a staged approach. So I would start by, we'll see if it works on the internet. If that doesn't work, I will perhaps put it behind a hardware appliance firewall, whitelist some rules. But I'm just curious how you manage that. How do you deal with that? I've also heard from some of you that have written in or reached out on Matrix to say, hey, I'm also struggling with this problem. I've also had trouble with 3CX, or I'm trying to move away from it, or I'm trying to set up a VoIP system. And some of you have experience doing that. And so if those of you out there are hearing this and you're saying, hey, that's me, I have a lot of experience doing exactly what you're talking about, I want to hear from you. So write into live@asknoahshow.com or reach out to me in the Geek Lab, geeklab:linuxdelta.com. I would love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear from your experience, perhaps bring you on the show and discuss a little bit more on how somebody can implement an open source VoIP system. Steve writes in and says, I was able to get OpenVPN firewall rules set up to direct specific traffic through the VPN. I tested it by curl, and I was able to get my public IP. I rebooted all the devices involved, including the router, but no luck. The guide I followed was this, and I'll have a link to the YouTube video in the show notes. I tested the kill switch with success. Only the LAN address loses internet, but I can't seem to get the VPN public address. Just when I thought I knew quite a bit about networking, I'm blown away by its complexity. So if you could help Steve out, he's one of my friends who is not Steve Ovens, different Steve, is learning and playing around with commercial networking gear and trying to set up a system in which the firewall rules will direct specific traffic through a VPN. And so he's got a guide that he followed. And I'll be honest with you, this is a bit out of my depth. It's not something we typically set up for clients. It's not something, when I set things up where I want something to go through a VPN, it's kind of an all in or all off sort of a thing. It's not kind of a mixture. So if you could take a look, and if somebody knows the answer to this, this is one of those things I'm going to put out into the audience, because I'm guessing there's somebody out there that's going to say, you know, I know exactly what to do. So take a look at it, find the notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com, then write in, and we'll see if we can't get Steve an answer as to how to set up his OpenVPN firewall rules to direct specific traffic through his VPN. I've never really considered myself a car person, right? I'm using my air finger quotes there. I'm a car person insofar as I like having a car. I prefer riding in a car or driving a car as to walking, especially in 25 below zero weather. But I'm not one of those car enthusiasts like you would ordinarily think of a car enthusiast. But lately that's been changing, in part because legislation has increased and it's requiring manufacturers to put things in vehicles that I'm not really interested in. The second thing is manufacturers, for a variety of reasons, have added technology that makes the car difficult, if not in some cases impossible, to work on or service on your own. And I distinctly remember when I was a kid going over to my grandpa's house and him talking with my uncles about the fact that if you buy a modern car, you can't work on it anymore. You open it up and it looks like a big trash can lid on the top. You can't get to any of the engine things. And at the time, I just kind of brushed it off. And for the most part, when I was purchasing cars or when I was looking at them, I was looking for convenience features. I was looking for the things that, were techie and stood out, and things that I would like as I was sitting in the car. Because again, not a car person. If it doesn't work, I'm taking it to a mechanic anyway. And it was when we started to get to the point of things like MAC addresses on servos, where you've got the most simple mechanical thing ever, where there's really not a good reason that I can ascertain to require you to enroll these devices inside of the car's computer. And yet that's what manufacturers are starting to do. And it's increasingly starting to make me uncomfortable. And so with the latest round of legislation, one of the things that they're requiring is in the infrastructure bill, included in the 2,700-page bill, is a provision directing the U.S. Secretary of Transportation to issue regulations to new motor vehicles requiring them to come equipped with advanced drunk driving and impaired prevention technology. There's just one problem. That technology doesn't yet exist. And so it is requiring manufacturers to eventually skate towards this idea where somebody can decide if you can drive your vehicle or not, which is kind of the antithesis of owning something, right? And don't get me wrong, do not mistake this. I am not advocating for people to drive under the influence. You should not do that. It's terrible. Lots of people die and lose their life every year. So not what I'm saying, but I am saying that it shouldn't be up to a manufacturer to decide if and when you drive your vehicle. That it goes against my ethos of owning something. And so I've started to become increasingly interested in cars, in vehicles. And starting to learn a little bit about how to maintain them myself and how to repair them myself. And as I've done that, I've started to get involved with other people that are car nuts and people that are motorheads, and so that they can teach me. And one of them shared with me a new open source project that he's using called Lublogger. You can learn more at lublogger.com. It's a self-hosted, open source, unconventionally named vehicle maintenance record and fuel mileage tracker. And so effectively, what this guy did was built this app to keep track of all of the parts. And instantaneously when I saw this, I thought I can understand exactly where these people are coming from. So you're trying to maintain your vehicle, you're trying to fix it. Do you remember if it was the left shock or the right shock that you replaced 4 years ago? Can you remember what oil filter goes with this model vehicle versus that model vehicle? Can you remember? All of these things are things that are important. They are necessary to track. You want to keep track of when they were last replaced and how long you got out of the part and those sorts of things, where to purchase the part, but where to track all of that. And so typically that's handled at a dealership or at a car repair place, and they're going to keep their own records. And so you'll walk in and say, well, I'm looking for this, and they'll have their own database to look things up in, and they'll be able to track and tell you when the last time you had the car and to do all these things. Well, if you start taking on that responsibility of yourself, where do you go to track all of that stuff? And how do you effectively run the software that a dealership would run without having to run the software that a dealership would run? And that's where Lublogger comes in. But it's specifically designed to be self-hosted, specifically designed to work on your own garage, and it's specifically designed to track for all of your own cars. Now, as I've been kind of playing around with it, here's what I've learned. You don't even necessarily have to want to maintain or do the work yourself. It can just be a nice record for you to keep track of, hey, here was the last time I took this vehicle in. Hey, here's the last time that I had this service performed. And so even if you're just a very busy professional and you're paying somebody else to maintain all of your vehicles, you may just want a self-hosted way that you can track the maintenance on your vehicles. Here's the last time I took the wife's vehicle in. Here's the last time I took my vehicle in. Hey, I got some young drivers in the house. Here's the last time they took their vehicles in. And then you have access to all of that data. It's right at your fingertips. And even if you go between dealerships, or even if you go between car repair places, or you do some of the work yourself, you take some of it in and have it done as service work, you have the opportunity to keep track of it and view it all yourself. Quote, I built this app over the span of a week because, frankly, I'm tired of using Excel spreadsheet to track all of my maintenance records, and I'm also frustrated that other free offerings on the market are fairly limited in features, or in order to coerce their users into paying for premium features. So here it is, Lublogger, an open source, self-hosted vehicle maintenance record and fuelage mile trackers. So some of the features, it keeps track of all your maintenance records and repair records. It keeps track of your fuel economy and supports both mile per gallon and liter per kilometer. It supports keeping track of taxes, registration, which is, that's that right there, just to say, hey, the tabs are coming up for renew on X vehicle. That bit me as we were headed out to camp this summer, and the vehicle that we usually use to tow the RV, make sure that that's all up to date and ready to go. There's no limit on how many vehicles you can have in your garage. Well, of course, because it's open source and it's self-hosted, so duh. It imports existing records from CSV, so you don't have to painstakingly reinsert everything. So if you're one of those people that have been keeping track of everything via a spreadsheet or a CSV, and now you want to go to a legitimate system, they support doing that. Nice charts to show your expenses by category and fuel expenses by month. Dark mode, absolute necessity, wouldn't use it otherwise. Authentication to secure the app if you have port forwarding set up, so presumably designed to be opened up to the internet and good enough for mobile screens or small screen support. And so if you're out in the garage or working on the vehicle, or you got to go make an adjustment, you can do so. You can pull out your mobile device and make the update right there. So the software, again, it's called Lublogger. You can learn more by going to lublogger.com or check out the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com. There, I'll have a link to Lublogger directly, as well as a YouTube video that kind of walks you through the features and screenshots, because I know for me, what's more helpful than hearing features or seeing them is being able to watch somebody actually use the software. And so he's got a nice little YouTube video that walks you through it. I think if you're a car person and you're interested in self-hosting a system to keep track of your maintenance, or if you want to self-host or keep track of stuff that other people are doing on your vehicles, I think this is a product you're going to want to check out. So that it'll be in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of July 7th, 2024, here's the Linux and open source news. After 14 years of Cantarell, GNOME is testing a new default font. Firefox 128 is out. Phoenix, one of the original Linux live distributions, has released version 126. CMake 3.30 is out. And GNU Cache 5.8 has been released. In security news, another OpenSSH vulnerability has been disclosed. And a new ransomware as a service named El Dorado is now targeting Windows and Linux systems. 4 unpatched security flaws, including 3 critical ones, have been disclosed in the GOG's open-source self-hosted Git service that could enable an authenticated attacker to breach susceptible instances, steal or wipe source code, and even plant backdoors. In open-source hardware news, RISC-V chips will support replacing RAM sticks without powering off the systems. Hot plugging functionality will be arriving in newer flavors of Linux. In open source AI news, Monocle is an open source tooling backed by a large language model for performing neural language searches against compiled targeted binaries. Meta has open sourced 4 language models that implement an emerging machine learning approach known as multi-token prediction. And NVIDIA's RTX Remix goes open source. The chipmaker has added a REST API to interface with Comfy UI for AI remastering or generating new graphics in real time.
Mauro Gaspari, the community engineer, and Lukas Märdian, a software engineer and the maintainer for Netplan, both guests this hour on Ask Noah Show. Welcome in, gentlemen.
Hello, Noah.
Hi, good to meet you.
Thanks for making the time to be here. So back in episode 386, which you can listen to at podcast.asknoahshow.com/386, Carrie writes in and said, for my home server, which is hosting VMs using libvirt and KVM, I'm trying to set up bridging as opposed to configuring my VMs to be directly attached to the server's NIC. The limitation with the directed attached method seems to be that none of the VMs can communicate with each other or the host. Unless I set up separate private network on the VMs that can communicate, I would like to avoid this limitation, and it seems like a solution to set up a network bridge. I was wondering if you know of any good guide to setting up network bridging on libvirt KVM on Ubuntu. I've been trying to set up via Ubuntu using Netplan, and I'm having some problems. I'm not sure if it's an issue with my configuration or possibly I just don't quite understand the bridging enough, or I'm making some mistake in my Netplan config. I have a server connected to a dumb, unmanaged Netgear switch, and it has other hosts connected to it. When I try to set up bridging on my server and apply the Netplan config, everything on that network loses its network connection. Do you have any ideas of what I might be doing wrong? So one of my absolute favorite things about this show is the fact that it's tied to other community members, and people hear it, and even if I don't have the best answer, somebody else often does. And so, Mauro, you're sitting at your home, and you're listening to episode 386, and you're jumping up and down and going, I know the answer to this question. I know the answer to this question. And you have gone above and beyond to provide a very detailed walkthrough for people that are trying to do this. So I guess to start, can you tell me how one would go about setting up libvirt on or bridging through libvirt using Netplan on Ubuntu?
All right, thanks, Noah. That is exactly what happened. I was here listening to the show, and I was like, ask me, I know. And then when I realized that it was a recorded show, the excitement went a little bit down because I realized I couldn't help. But then I thought, maybe I can help. So I drafted some notes on how to do this. I do this myself in my home lab with Ubuntu and Netplan and KVM. Very similar scenarios. So I drafted some notes and prepared some plan to reach out to you. But by that time, it was basically, we were flying to a canonical engineering sprint. So I reached out to Lukas and Danilo and Robert, who work on Netplan. And I thought, hey, let's have a chat. and let's see if we can do better than this. So basically, we prepared a plan to help the listeners of the Noah Show and go beyond that. So the plan is, I wrote 3 scenarios on how to do exactly this on an Ubuntu server. And the 3 scenarios are basically increasing the level of complexity of the network, starting from very simple to more complex scenarios. And then I want to reinforce this was a team effort. Lukas, Danilo, and Robert did great work helping me to make these scenarios better. They helped me review them. And in the end, I created a pull request. They reviewed it, they merged it, and now all these 3 scenarios live in the official Netplan documentation repository. So going a little bit more into how you do it, the first scenario is what we could consider a very, let's say, entry-level home lab. Maybe somebody who has a Raspberry Pi or a single computer with a single network card and a simple switch and wants to use virtual machines. So the first scenario, which we will link in the show notes, just to walk you through the very basic configuration of the network card in Netplan, and then creation of the bridge on top of that network card with the correct parameters that you need. And then we also thought to go a little bit beyond and put some commands to create the virtual networks in with Virch or libvirt, so that it will be even easier if somebody is using, I don't know, Cockpit or Virt Manager to assign that network to virtual machines. The second scenario is basically very similar, but we are scaling up a little bit. So single host, single network card, but maybe somebody who has a switch that is layer 2 compatible with VLANs. And maybe they have, some security in mind, and they want a guest VLAN or a DMZ for some IoTs they don't really trust too much, or things like that. And so basically the same premises for the recipe is that, but then basically you are configuring your network card, untag the VLAN, tag the VLANs, and on top of the VLANs, then you are creating the bridges there. And then also creating, adding the Virch commands to create the virtual network again. So you can just do clicky from your Cockpit or Virt Manager to assign networks to your virtual machines. And the last scenario is a little bit more complex. It's single host, 4 network cards. Therefore, some of the network cards are in a bonding or something that some other people might recognize we call by Ether channel. On the bonding, you create the VLANs, tag and untag the VLANs, and on top of the VLANs, then you create the bridges there. And again, the commands to create those virtual networks in Virch, so that again, you can just point and click, and once it's done, basically you only click around and spin up new VMs as you wish. On top of that, the last little sprinkling some goodness on top, there is also in the official documentation a recipe to tell you how to just tell Netplan. They say, listen, Netplan, let the network manager do its thing. So that basically it's passing the baton to network manager. So if you are a fan of Cockpit, you can just again point and click and create all the networking configuration directly from the web interface. Before I pass the microphone to Lukas, I wanted to shout out quickly on the Canonical Open Documentation Academy, which is an initiative that the technical authors at Canonical started to promote and encourage more contribution, collaboration, and mentor people on how to become a good technical author. It's all done in the open. They did help me a great deal with this. And you can find them on the Ubuntu discourse, and you can find their office hours on a playlist on the Ubuntu On Air YouTube channel.
Very cool. So, Lukas, can you walk us through Netplan? How do you set up Mauro's 3 scenarios?
Yeah, actually, as a maintainer of Netplan, I would love to cycle back a little bit and introduce listeners to what Netplan is all about and why it does exist in the first place. I guess talking through the individual settings of the scenarios, it's better for listeners to actually check out the documentation and the scripts that Mauro prepared. Talking through all those individual settings is probably hard on just an audio level. So yeah, what is Netplan all about? Netplan is a tool for declarative network management. It provides the flexibility to work with several backends such as Network Manager and systemd Network D, as Mauro explained. And I think in the default case, it uses systemd Network D, but people can switch to Network Manager if they're using a desktop environment, for example, or if they want to use Cockpit. Netplan keeps the same configuration files, the same syntax, and thus we are able to ship a common universal documentation for any case. And that's actually also the reason why Netplan exists. It was introduced, I think, more than 7 years ago, when Ubuntu wanted to switch to systemd Network D for their cloud instances. But we also wanted to keep Network Manager on the Ubuntu desktop systems due to its nice UI integration of several desktop environments. So we needed, and we didn't want to explain people that there are now 2 different ways to do network configuration on one Ubuntu system, essentially. So Netplan was created as kind of a common layer. It doesn't replace the networking daemons, it's just a unification layer on top of it. So yeah, as Mauro explained earlier in the scenarios that he mentions and that are linked from the show notes, if people prefer to use Network Manager, they can just switch one single setting, that is the renderer setting, to define Netplan or to instruct Netplan to generate configuration for Network Manager instead of systemd Network D. And once that is switched and the new configuration is applied, Netplan will then transfer all the configuration that was previously used for systemd Network D to Network Manager. And then interactive tools such as NMT-UI, Cockpit, or the usual Network Manager UI can be used to control Network Manager as usual. But the special bit about that is that the dynamic configuration that is configured dynamically through NMT-UI, for example, will also be written back into the Netplan configuration. So people can actually use NMT-UI to modify the Netplan configuration, and it will all be reflected. And later on, they can kind of switch back to another renderer if they feel like. This integration between Network Manager and Netplan was made possible through the bidirectional integration that we implemented as of last year. It was first enabled in Ubuntu Mantic Minotaur, which was the October release last year, and it's also the default in the current 24.04 LTS release of Ubuntu. It was enabled by the new library functions that we provided in Netplan 1.0. So we made our first stable release after 7 years, Netplan 1.0, in February of 2024. And that enables the deep integration with Network Manager. In addition to that, it also brings some quality of life improvements, such as a new Netplan status command, which you can use to see, get an aggregated picture of a system's network status. In addition to, there's a parameter --diff that you can use to also compare the system's network status versus the Netplan configuration. So you have a configuration that defines how the networking is supposed to be, and then you have the actual system state, and you can actually compare the two things and see if there's any differences in between. Right, so I also want to say that Netplan is not just an canonical project, it's not just an Ubuntu project, but it's actually used across the board. Ubuntu was the first to use it. It's used in Ubuntu since 7 years, including 4 major LTS releases, so it's installed on millions of devices around the globe. But besides that, Debian picked up Netplan as its default configuration tool for the cloud images with their bookworm stable release, Debian 12, that was released last year. We've also got some integration landed in the Calamares installer, which is the tool that is used to install many of the Ubuntu flavors, like Ubuntu or Ubuntu, for example, but also the Debian live images. And we have also big corporations like Microsoft or Deutsche Telekom who contributed to Netplan because they want to make it better integrate with their own systems. So we know that it's being used in Microsoft's Azure Linux, as we got some recent contributions from Microsoft, and we also know that it's being used in Deutsche Telekom public clouds. Deutsche Telekom is the biggest ISP in Germany, essentially, and they contributed some big new feature that is also included in the Netplan 1.0 release. So that's really great to see other projects picking up Netplan as well. Netplan is a proper open source project, and we would like to welcome everybody to find us on GitHub, contribute documentation through the Open Documentation Academy, or also code new features, bug fixes, whatever you like. And yeah, you can find us on netplan.io.
Give me the 30-second elevator pitch on the Open Documentation Academy. What is it? Who is it for?
The Canonical Open Documentation Academy is an initiative started by the technical authors at Canonical to promote more collaboration and contributions in open source by teaching people how to think about good documentation and mentor them into the not only write the thing, but everything that is beyond that. They want to encourage better documentation everywhere, right? Because then it will help the community. If you ever try to do something for a project and then you don't know how and the documentation is non-existent, then it can become very complicated. So by having better understanding on how documentation works in an open source project, we want to encourage more contributions. And those are non-code contributions for the most part, which can get all sorts of people interested to become from interested to involved in open source.
Yeah, on top of that, I think it's also an entry point for people that would like to contribute to find things that they can actually work on. Like they have a big list of issues on GitHub with things that would need to be properly documented. And then people can say, I want to work on this, and they will get help from the Canonical technical authors to actually get it done.
I can add
Awesome.
a couple of things here. I listened to the first few episodes of the Canonical Open Documentation Academy, and in those ones, they teach you how to contribute using GitHub, right, to the documentation. And in the second episode, actually, they explained a thing that I really did not know myself, which you can contribute through GitHub without writing a single command on the command line, which I did not know. And therefore, that's how I contributed to those 3 recipes. I say, okay, I know Git, I use it from the command line. I was not really aware that you could do it 100% from the web interface. So I did those 3 contributions without touching the terminal. And I have to say, that's extremely easy to do. You go there, you click edit this document. GitHub will tell you, well, you can't, but do you want me to fork this and create, right? And then it does it for you. You just type the text. And when you're ready, you click on submit the pull request. And I would have to say that this is as easy as it gets. I want to say this because some people who might know how to write, maybe they might be discouraged because they do not have the software engineering background to understand everything Git, and this is not a requirement. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that when your pull request finally gets merged into the official documentation, I will admit that it feels pretty good.
Mauro Gaspari, the community engineer, and Lukas Märdian, the software engineer and maintainer for Netplan. I appreciate your time, gentlemen. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Thank you, Noah. See you
Thanks
soon.
a lot.
If you work in production or deal with performances, you're going to want to know about a site called stagehacks.com. Stagehacks.com. It's tools for making performances work better. It's a collection of tools that if you work in production or performance, you're going to want to be aware of. So a friend of mine pointed me in the direction of this, and some of these tools you're going to recognize. Things like BitFocus Companion, Video Ninja, and Tally Arbiter. We've talked about these things on the program on the past. So BitFocus Companion, it allows the Elgato Stream Deck to control all manner of things and turns it into, no word of a lie, a fully functional production-ready video switcher. Things like Video Ninja allow you to bring in screenshots, screen shares, or live video of other participants and bring them directly in to OBS Studio. And of course, Tally Arbiter. Tally Arbiter allows you to send tally data to just about anywhere, USB peripherals, phones, Arduinos, even to the cloud. And so you can use them with those little M5 sticks and create what ordinarily would be a very expensive camera that you have to buy to support tally lights so that you know which camera is live. And combining the M5 stick as well as Tally Arbiter, you're able to replicate that with open source software and use it on commodity hardware. And so those tools you're probably familiar with if you've listened to the show. But some software that I wasn't personally previously familiar with, things like OnTime. OnTime is a free open source software for managing rundowns and event timers. OnTime is browser-based and manages scheduling and queuing and those sorts of things. And so if you have a performance or you have a production that you're trying to do and you're trying to stay on time and on clock, something like OnTime allows you to do that. And that way, everybody that's participating in the production knows, hey, our go time is, let's say, 9 o'clock. Well, at 9 o'clock, everybody's going to be watching the same source of truth. And when that same source of truth counts down and hits 9 o'clock, the production begins. Then you get to, let's say, the next element begins at 9:06. At 9:06, virtually every radio show in the country starts at 6 after the hour. If you're trying to time things and you're trying to match up so that your show starts when other people's shows start, those sorts of things, you can use something like OnTime so that at 6 minutes after the hour, boom, you have the cue and everybody knows to start. The other thing is a kind of similar vein, StageTimer.io. StageTimer.io is a web service that remotely controls timer displays. It includes talent messaging to remind them to hold the mic closer. It's free for limited devices. It's made by a guy by the name of Lukas Herman. And then there was another program that I hadn't previously heard of that immediately jumped to the top of my radar, DieCaffeine. DieCaffeine, you can learn more at diecaffeine.com. And it's an NDI player. Get this, it does NDI or RTMP streams for Linux distributions. So you can set up a Raspberry Pi or a Raspbian OS, and you can have it play NDI streams. If you're not familiar with NDI, it is the way that video is going to be done in the future. So we started with SDI, and effectively a coaxial cable that has BNC ends on it, and you run it into SDI feeds from cameras that support SDI, or you take consumer-grade cameras that are using consumer-grade HDMI and convert them to SDI. Well, NDI does the similar thing, but it does it over network. So in the same way that AES-67 does audio over IP, the entire way that we do audio here at the Ask Noah studio, if you're doing something like that for video, you would use NDI. And one of the problems with NDI is, of course, if the video is on the network, then you have to somehow subscribe to those feeds. Well, what if you want to do something like play it on a television? What if you want a little monitor to be able to see what the video production is doing? You'll need a way to subscribe to that feed that's on the network and play it out. DieCaffeine is an NDI player that allows you to do exactly that. So the software is distributed for free. They appreciate donations and support the future development. So if it's something that you find use in, go back to diecaffeine.com and make a donation, because that enables them to keep doing what they're doing. The streamer supports classic NDI and RTMP. So if you're not familiar with RTMP, it's basically the standard that's used across security cameras. So if you're using access cameras, it's going to generate an RTMP feed. If you are streaming out of software like Wirecast or OBS, you're going to be streaming RTMP, the real-time media protocol. And so you can capture those feeds and you can bring them out as a player. So another way that you might choose to do this, let's say you have your favorite stream. You have your favorite live stream and you want the ability to bring that in as a source, or you want the ability to expose that to a television or some sort of output device. Well, you can use DiCaffeine, point it towards that RTMP feed, and stream a live video stream, stream a live camera feed, whatever you need to do. DiCaffeine will allow you to do that via hardware that you probably already have. Then they have another section, what I'm going to describe as stuff that makes stuff better. So it's not necessarily a product, it's not necessarily a software, but it's a thing that you can use in conjunction with other things. So let's say that you're a person and you're using the Stream Deck to do all of your video switching. And you say to yourself, I like the Stream Deck, but this little plastic thing slides all over to the desk and it's obnoxious. And oh, by the way, maybe I need to mount it inside of a 19-inch traditional rack mount. How do you do that? Well, there's a company out there called DeckRack, and DeckRack makes professional metal mounting hardware for Stream Decks. And so if you are using Companion and you're using the Stream Deck to do all of your video switching, but you need the ability to mount that in a rack, or you need a metal enclosure so that you can have a professional grade looking device when you take it out to go compete with the big boys that are using all the proprietary stuff, well, DeckRack will meet you there and they'll allow you to do that. And so these are the kind of things where it's the glue that brings everything together. You have BitFocus Companion, you have a Stream Deck, and you're going to sit out and it's going to look different than your professional video switcher. So companies like DeckRack that make professional enclosures allow you to be able to compete in kind of the same way. They make rugged mounts for the Elgato Stream Deck, professional materials, touring-grade CNC cut metal plates, robotically bent and powder-coated to last years for production. Because if there's anything we know about production equipment is it's got to be able to take a beating. You can't treat it like a little snowflake. You have to be able to work with it. It's a tool, right? And so this is the kind of thing that turns what would be a $99, was really designed as really a gamer accessory, right? It was never designed to leave the parents' basement of your teenage gamer. That's really what the Stream Deck was originally designed for. And people have turned it into all manner of things to control all manner of things. And the ability to produce a professional, rugged device that can house it kind of ups the game. BitFocus, they also have a docs site. And so this again is one of the things that I wouldn't have thought to put together, but I'm glad that somebody did. And the docs site has, as you might expect, documentation and learning resources for people getting into production. So you're a person who you want to get involved with your theater or your high school theater, or maybe you want to get involved with it at your church. Maybe you want to start your own production company. Whatever it is, you're going to want to learn about doing production. And so there are a number of things just in this short little segment that we've been talking about. If you're new to it, the concept of NDI is new to you. The concept of SDI is new to you. The concept of AES67 is new to you. The concept of managing a clock and being able to stay on time for the various elements, all of those things are new to you. And so where do you go to kind of get a crash course in production? Well, if you head over to their website, stagehacks.com, scroll down to the docs section, they have documentation for stuff like basic networking for theater. So when we're talking about networking in a traditional sense in like an office environment, well, you're going to deal with computers and you might have some smartphones and maybe some printers and those sorts of things, right? When you get into theater, it's a whole different ballgame because AES67 is multicast traffic, so you're having to do IGMP snooping and you're having to configure switches and get everything set up specifically to handle audio over IP. Then on the other side, you've got video going over the network. Increasingly, lighting is going over the network. So where we're doing everything over DMX, now you've got ArtNet and you've got DMX and you've got DMX over IP. And there's all sorts of things that are now hitting the network. And all of those things have different requirements, and they have to have switches configured differently, and you have to be able to segment the traffic off appropriately. You have to be able to get access to the various different bobs and bits when you need to, being able to jump VLANs and route stuff. They walk through all of that. They also walk through exploring the network. This is something that I think it'd be particularly useful if you come into an environment that you're not previously familiar with. So you come into an environment inside of a theater, or you come into a production environment and you maybe took a new job and somebody else has done all of the setting up, right? It's easy to work on a system that you've set up. It's easy to work on a system that you can build from scratch. It's much more difficult to step into an environment where somebody else has put everything up and then you try to fill in the gaps. And so they have a documentation on exploring the network and learning how to see what is set up and to see what's actually going on in the network. They have a sound reference note. Sound reference notes give you a guide on how to deal with audio and exhaustive notes on how to make EV happen for theater of any size. And so it goes over things like rental shops, tools, venues. It goes over things like cable management and rigging. I've never, I had the fortunate experience of working in college. I had a part-time job working in the production theater. And so effectively, really what it amounted to was building sets for whatever the play was. But along with that, you learned how to coil cable. You learned how to terminate a wire on a power light source, and how to position those properly and how to cable them properly. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't know that you need to know if you work into production. And this site does an absolutely stellar job of laying it all out for you. So the site again is stagehacks.com. You can learn more by going to stagehacks.com. I'll have some of my favorites listed out in the show notes of podcast.asknoahshow. You can check them out there. The music in my ears means I'm out of time. I appreciate you joining us. We record the show live every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. You can listen live at asknoahshow.com. You can also head over to podcast.asknoahshow.com. There, you'll find all of the articles and references I use to put the show together, as well as the entire back catalog. So you can start at episode 1 and work your way up. If you want to stay up to date on the latest, follow us on Twitter. I'm at Colonel Linux. He's at Linux Ovens. The show is at Ask Noah Show. We're back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. AskNoahShow.com.